A few months ago, I received an email from psychiatrist Dr. Robert Alcorn on the topic of Jinn and some information he had that I may be interested in. Well, of course, he was right. I was interested in what he had to say. And we caught up, and after speaking for a few fascinating hours, he kindly agreed to do an interview for this channel. He is a psychiatrist, an author, a shamanic practitioner, and energy healer. Over this hour, we spoke about his journey from mainstream psychiatry towards spiritual healing, the personal experiences that drove this change and development in him, and the healing techniques from shamanism that exposed him to how the spirit world is interacting with us, with the human world rather, on an industrial level. This, of course, brings us to the Jinn, and in Dr. Alcorn's own words, the woowoo experiences he had with the Jinn during shamanic journeying, but also his clinical experiences of working with clients under attack from the Jinn. We spoke about what they are, and interestingly, how they are not demons but in fact elemental beings. It's a really interesting talk, and one I'm really happy to share on the channel and kind of add to the information and knowledge base about what's happening. So without further ado, on with the interview. Dr. Alcorn has been practicing psychiatry since 1974. He was graduated from Yale College in 1966, cum laude, and Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine in 1970. He did a rotating internship in medicine and psychiatry at Herrick Memorial Hospital in Berkeley, California in 1970 to 71, and an adult psychiatry residency at the University Hospitals of Cleveland from 1971 to 74. He completed a fellowship in forensic psychiatry, law and psychiatry in 1985 at University Hospitals of Cleveland. He is board certified in psychiatry and forensic psychiatry. And he's also a holistic psychiatrist, shamanic practitioner, and energy healer. Dr. Alcorn, thank you very much for joining us today. And to kick things off, you have a very interesting background. It would be interesting to hear how you've come from this background in psychiatry to having a view of energy healing and dealing with spiritual entities.
Well, that's a bit of a story. You might ask, what's a nice boy like me doing in a funny place like this? From my scientific training, I've been very interested in spiritual things all my life, basically. But in about the mid-90s, I had an unusual experience where I heard a voice warning me about a man who was about to mug me in downtown Providence, Rhode Island. It's the first time I ever heard a voice. And I thought, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm not supposed to be hearing voices. So I said, what? And the voice repeated it. It said, there's a man in the alley, he's gonna run out and grab you. So I said in my head to the voice, what should I do? Should I run across the alley, make a mad dash for it? Or run across the park over there? And the voice said, just walk across the alley. So I walked across the alley and this man came out and grabbed me. And it was so interesting phenomenon that I thought, I'd like to see who this is, who's going to mug me. So I dropped my borrowed red frilly umbrella that my daughter gave me and turned and looked him in the eyes. And he became quite frightened and ran away. I don't think it was because I'm such an imposing fellow myself. So later I asked a psychic, what did this man see that made him so frightened? She said he saw the face of one of your guides floating above your head.
Wow.
So this introduced me to what some have recently called the paradigm attachment disorder, where I had to shift my paradigm of thinking about what's reality. Subsequently, I decided I'd better find out if I can improve my intuitive skills. So I began writing down dreams. And after about 2 years of writing my dreams down every night, I had a dream that directed me to study energy healing with a woman named Rosalind Bruyere. I started that study in 1999 and continued it for several years, learning how to do hands-on energy work. So this takes me pretty far out of the medical paradigm. Subsequently, I became frustrated with that because it seemed everyone else in the class was more intuitive than I was and could hear their guides and see them talking to them. And I discovered that I could take training in shamanic practices through the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. So I did that. And this led me through a number of steps, including learning soul retrieval from Sandra Ingerman. And then from there, to learn compassionate depossession from Betsy Bergstrom, who was a shamanic teacher in Seattle, Washington. This was, at each step, like jumping off a cliff without a parachute for a man of my past training.
Sure.
At any rate, when I went to the compassionate depossession training, it was a 5-day intensive workshop in a beautiful retreat center in Oregon. As Betsy was talking about the phenomenon of spirit attachment and how it affects people, first of all, she passed out a sheet of the signs and symptoms of spirit attachment. And I'll explain a little more what that means in a minute. The list of signs and symptoms was a complete compendium of every known psychiatric symptom. And I thought when I saw that, boy, am I in trouble. Everything I've been learning is wrong. And I have to learn the truth. So as she continued to discuss the theory and practice of depossession and how spirit attachment occurs, I began remembering something that happened to me in 1966. After I graduated from college, I went to Europe for a grand tour for the summer. And I was in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, Italy, one day, looking at some painting, which I don't remember now. A room that was completely deserted. I was the only one in the room, not even a guard. And I felt I was attacked from behind. I had a panic attack. I had to get up and leave the museum. And then I dismissed that. It was just crazy to think there was nobody there to attack me. So how could that be? And I just forgot about it. So here I am, what is it, 41 years later, 2007, remembering this quite vividly. Mm-hmm. Trying to dismiss the memory because I wanted to hear what Betsy was saying and watch what she was doing. What she was doing was periodically taking somebody from the class who had gotten upset and agitated because of the material and doing a depossession on them. Because what was happening was the spirits that were attached to each of us started to get agitated.
Right.
And then after a day of this, I realized that the memory I was having, I was sharing with a spirit who had jumped into me in the Uffizi Gallery, and he was still there. And he was hearing the same talks and watching the same demonstrations that I was. And he'd figured out what happened to him. And he wanted out. And then I could feel his head sort of next to mine, to the right, like he was trying to get out of me already.
Wow.
So then it was my turn to be the subject of this procedure. And basically it's a kind of a hypnotic process with some mindfulness meditation thrown in, during which it was possible for me to become more separate from him. And I was able to hear him speaking. The practitioner who was working on me asked him, who are you? What's your name? And he told me his name and said he was British. He'd gone to Florence on holiday and jumped off a building to kill himself. So when he was released from me and taken up into the world of light, as we say, he took with him all his despair, and I stopped being depressed.
Wow.
So I thought, this is amazing for a number of reasons. One of them was that in 20 minutes or so, you could cure somebody from depression if you did this. And if that was the cause. And It was also interesting because in the course of my studies of subtle energy work and shamanic work, none of the practitioners that had worked on me had said, "Oh, by the way, Bob, you have an extra person in there." So apparently these spirits who attach to you can be very good at hiding. And that seems to be very important to them. They don't want to be displaced once they found a safe place to be inside another person. So that's what got me started in what some people call the woo-woo world.
Very interesting. That's remarkable that you had an experience finding that you were carrying a spirit with you in that session. That's going to transform your way of seeing the world. There's no doubt about it. And what was the perception of you when you started to kind of change within the general psychiatric community with your peers?
Well, I believe the general psychiatric community doesn't have any idea what I'm doing.
Right.
I don't associate with psychiatrists very much anymore, or doctors in general.
Mm-hmm.
When I was studying subtle energy work, I was very excited about that, and I would put people on a massage table and lay my hands on anybody who would hold still for a while. One of them was a psychiatric colleague who had had a major surgical procedure done, and she agreed to allow me to work on her post-operatively. So I went to her home and worked on her while she was in a lounge chair, and she fell asleep. So I just let myself out of the house very quietly and went home. And she was grateful for that because her post-operative recovery period was very benign. At the same time, a social work colleague of ours had the same procedure done, and she had all kinds of complications. So that's a study of two people, which doesn't mean much scientifically, but I thought maybe there is something to it because the one person had such a benign course and the other had such a difficult course.
Mm.
I got into the more spiritual aspects of it, talking to invisible people and so on. I've kind of kept that to myself.
Right.
I did make a video of a depossession of a patient of mine with the help of a colleague who has a device called the bioluminator, which somehow alters the coherence of light photons in a room so that Polaroid photos can show spirits.
Right.
And during the process of this video, two of the four spirits that I was working with who had attached to this woman showed up in his photos. And I showed that to a psychiatrist and two nurse practitioners. The nurse practitioners were very excited about it. The psychiatrist fell silent and had nothing to say to me afterwards. I decided this is probably not my target audience.
Yeah, that's understandable. And in terms of your shamanic training, did that kind of give you a kind of a greater vocabulary for what was going on with the spirit worlds? I know you mentioned on your site that there's different types of intrusion. Could you take me through that a little bit?
Well, there may be two main ideas here. One is that it's very common for people to have spirits attached to them in the Western world. Because we don't recognize the phenomenon, we don't have any rituals or ceremonies to deal with it.
Mm.
So people die and they don't cross into another dimension. They hang out here with us. And when you're out of a body, you need to have energy drawn from a physical source in order to stay on the physical plane. So the only way to do that is to attach to a living being.
Right.
And usually that means another person. Sometimes it can be an animal. I actually found an earthbound spirit attached to a cat.
Wow.
Asked to exorcise this cat by a psychic who'd been working with the family.
Mm.
And we found this man who had died and was a good Catholic. He thought it would be a sin to attach to another person, but he thought it was okay if he did it with a cat.
Right.
one of the weirder situations I've run into. So in '99, there was a gentleman who came to the Cleveland area. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, in the U.S., more or less Cleveland. Mali Doma Somé, who is a fairly well-known African man who has tried to serve as a bridge between the tribal world and the Western scientific world. He taught a workshop at which he announced to the group after they all trooped in to start the weekend training. He said, "Now I understand why there's so much depression and insanity in the U.S. Every one of you walked in here with at least 3 ghosts attached to you."
Wow.
So that is maybe just somewhat self-selected audience, people interested in spiritual phenomena from point of view of indigenous peoples, may not be a cross-section of all of the U.S. But in my subsequent trainings, Betsy Bergstrom asked our group in the advanced depossession seminar she gave, "What do you think is the incidence of spirit attachment in the United States?" And everybody said 100%. That means everybody in the U.S. has a spirit attached to them, at least one. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's very common. And it is such a widespread phenomenon, and has such a negative effect on people that it's really something we need to learn how to deal with. So that's one aspect of it. When we talk about possession, there are degrees to it. And in the spiritualist world 100 years ago or so, when spiritualism was much more common in the US, they talked about these degrees in terms of, let's see, compulsion, obsession, and possession. So obsession would be a spirit who is attached kind of to the periphery of the person's energy field. Mm-hmm. Compulsion represents when that spirit has penetrated more deeply into the person and is able to make them do things instead of just sort of peppering them with their thoughts. And possession means when the spirit has completely taken over the person. And that's a much more rare phenomenon. So what we're really talking about is spirit attachment, which is more kind of on the edges of the field or with some degree of penetration. And I think that's an important concept to understand, because the ones that are more on the periphery are a lot easier to deal with, and the ones that have penetrated right into the core of the being can be very sticky and very difficult to remove.
That makes sense.
Now, in terms of what kind of spirits they are, most commonly it's dead humans, because a lot of people die, and a lot of them never know what to do when they die. Mm-hmm. People who talk to the dead, the psychics who do seances and readings, know a fair amount about this. They know, for example, that often people who die don't realize they're dead because they don't feel a whole lot different, except maybe whatever was hurting doesn't hurt anymore, because the body was where the pain was being kept. And in trying to deal with these spirits, one of the first things you've got to do is ascertain whether they know they've died or not. Because if they think they're still alive, they think they belong wherever they are. And they often don't cross because of ignorance. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know they're dead. Or they don't want to leave because they have some emotional attachment they haven't given up. I'll give you a little example of that. It's a nice, clean case. The person who came for my help said she'd begun to hear a voice at the age of 50, which is atypical for any known psychiatric condition. Mm-hmm. Had no other signs of major psychiatric disorder. The voice was that of a man who only spoke when she was driving her car. And what he would do was swear at women drivers and call them unsavory names. And she told me that she knew this wasn't her own psychology producing it, because she would never call a woman by those names. Mm-hmm. So we put her in trance and discovered this gentleman had picked up his new Lexus at the dealer and was driving it home and was involved in a collision with another car when a woman driver talking on her cell phone crashed through a red light and killed him.
Right.
He didn't know that he was dead. All he knew was that she had ruined his car.
Right.
So he was very angry at this woman for talking on her phone and destroying his brand new car, which was the pride of his life.
Sure.
So once he found out he was dead, he didn't care about the car so much. And it was quite easy to get him to cross into the light. And the patient never heard a voice again. So that was a fun one, and it's a good example of a kind of attachment.
Right.
My video, the first spirit we encountered was the great-grandmother of the patient, who was very attached to her because she wanted to help her and protect her from the abuse the woman had been suffering. So that's another example. The spirit may have a very benign intention, but her presence in the energy field of the patient had a detrimental effect on the patient because it was draining energy.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a common feature of this kind of earthbound spirit attachment, regardless of the intent of the spirit. It may be as benevolent as can be, but their being there sucking energy from your field is not a good thing for you.
Mm.
Sometimes they don't have good intentions. Sometimes they can be quite nasty people. But the effect is pretty much the same.
Mm.
The second category, let's see, where am I? The earthbound spirits. Then there are dark entities, which are, among earthbound spirits, I should add, occasionally and bizarrely, I find dead animals.
Right.
In one case, it was a cheetah who had been shot by white hunters in Africa, and he was very angry about that and stayed earthbound and was jumping from person to person and causing some mischief because of his rage against humans. Okay, the next major issue would be dark force entities. This is a term used by William Baldwin, who is one of the pioneers in this field in the Western world anyway. The more common term, the religious term, would be demons.
Right.
Or devils. Sometimes they identify themselves as devils. There's a channeled wise being known as Monitor who refers to them as our dark brothers. What I've found is that a true dark force entity is an angelic being who has fallen from the light, fallen from grace.
Okay.
Chosen to take a dive out of the world of light into the world of darkness because they've been seduced away. And so these beings are usually, well, almost always detrimental in their intentions toward the victim. Mm. And it's a very complex area. I should say the demon world is a bit like a military organization. There's a hierarchy, and any demon you encounter has a boss, and the boss has a boss, and so on up the food chain. And their goal is to prevent humans from becoming enlightened. So they are trying to weaken the energy field of a human by sucking the energy away.
Right.
And by instilling despair and fear and anger in people, which are low vibration emotional states. So the demon who's attacking my patient will be doing those things, or maybe even trying to induce illness, physical illnesses, and drawing energy from the patient. But he can't keep much of it for himself. They feed on this energy. That's their sustenance. Mm-hmm. He has to send, let's say, 90% to his boss, and the boss has to send a fair amount of that to his boss, and so on. And so usually the one that I would encounter attacking the patient directly is kind of a low-level flunky within the system.
Right.
And it becomes necessary to go up the food chain to really get control of the whole issue. And it's very important in following this line of thought, this line of experience, to realize that exorcism is a bit guided, in my opinion, as it is generally understood. And an exorcism, as done by the Catholic Church, you treat any kind of spirit entity as coming from the devil, whether it's an earthbound spirit or whatever, is just wrong. It's not the way it is. And that they are an adversary who has to be defeated and cast out, and casting them basically into hell. So you do that by metaphorically smacking them over the head with the Bible, sprinkling them with holy water to make them uncomfortable until they leave. And where they go, the priest has no control over. So it's a little like sending the fox into the briar patch.
Right, okay.
He can hide there and then he can come back out when you're gone. So what we do is remind this fallen angel of his true identity. I will ask them, first of all, you neutralize their power by surrounding them with angels. And then it's possible to have a conversation. And you often have to put a protection around the demon so that his boss can't get at him. And then they become a little more amenable to a conversation.
Right.
Because they're terrified of their boss. It's against the rules to talk to a light worker. So I'll ask him, where were you living and what did you do before you entered the dark world? And then with some help from the angelic team around them, they can be taken back in their mind to the time when they lived in the world of light and were seduced away. And they realize they didn't get what was promised to them, that the people who run the dark world lie and so forth. And so they don't have to feel bound to any contract they've made to be in the dark world doing that business. And they're quite willing then to leave the victim and go to a kind of a place of reform in the world of light. So that's kind of a quick capsule summary of the demon world, what we do with them, and why it's different from exorcism. Very important in approaching that to deal with these beings. I just had to correct myself. I was about to say entity.
Yeah.
I was taught by Betsy Bergstrom not to think of them as entities, but as suffering beings.
Okay.
And that really changes the whole flavor of it, to realize that even a demon is someone who is suffering and needs relief. Suffering. So that changes the energetic of it and the spiritual ethic.
Changes the relationship too.
Substantially. Now, in doing this kind of work, and my wife, Barbara Stone, and I have been together working in this way for 6 years now, and we've learned a great deal from each other. She had an approach where she identified what she called an imposter spirit. And these were beings that would pose as spirit guides or pose as a benign relative and cause all kinds of mischief. And when we tried to remove them, it would be very shifty and very difficult to deal with. And sometimes they would leave, but they would come back within a few days. So this was a puzzle that she was trying to figure out. In the process of this acquaintance with her approach and her acquaintance with my approach, we'd been reading about the Jinn. In particular, a book by Rosemary Ellen Guiley and a second author whose name I forget. The book is titled The Vengeful Jinn. This presents mostly information drawn from literary sources from direct contact with the Jinn, and presents them as terrifying, powerful, demon-like creatures. But to her credit, Guiley recognizes that the Jinn and the demons are quite different beings. As I said, the demons come from the angelic world.
Yeah.
And the Jinn come from Earth. They live here. They are Earth beings. They are elementals, as is said in spiritualist communities.
Right.
Considered of the fire element. And so it's a very different business. And they do not have the militaristic hierarchy in their society. Their much more individualistic. I liken them more to hippies than to soldiers.
Right. Okay.
I don't mean any insult to the Jinn race by saying that, just to say that they're more individual in their approach to things.
Right.
So we had read this book and had tried to understand, could this be the imposter spirits? Because they seemed a little more clever than the demons. The demons tend to have sort of one trick. One of the rules of understanding the demon world is that the demon can only do to a human what was being done to him by his boss.
Right.
So if the boss filled the demon with despair, then that's what the demon would do to the human. So then one day, Barbara and I were meditating together, or drumming as we call it, because I would be drumming and doing shamanic sort of journeying, and she would be praying. And in my shamanic prayers, I sing some Hawaiian incantations and then do some setting of sacred space, calling them to directions, which is kind of a typical thing indigenous practitioners do. And then I would greet the various guides and helping spirits who I've met, because it seems every time I take a workshop, I meet new guides. And at the end of this fairly lengthy recitation, Barbara said to me, usually when you sing the names of the angels, they sing with you. But this time they seemed very intent on containing some visitors who had come into our space. It seemed very important that they protect us and keep us secure. And she also commented that she saw many Native American spirits dancing as I was drumming this time, which was unusual. It was like there was some event about to happen.
Right.
So I said, all right, let's see who these beings are. The guides must have allowed them in for some reason. We are very protected when we do this work. And we now have to find out what this is about. So she said she saw 5 very tall beings, maybe 8 feet tall, who seemed to be wrapped in spider webs, kind of pointy on the top. And that may have been the containment that were placed around them by the angels. So I spoke to them and Barbara channeled their responses to me. I asked them, who are you and what is it that you want? Is there one of you who will be a spokesman for the group? One of them stepped forward and said, we are the Jinn, and we have come to investigate what you are doing because you are messing with our plans. So I said, I don't know much about the Jinn. I have recently read a little bit, and I know that you have serious grievances against humanity. How is it that we're messing with your plans? And he said, we are trying to destroy humanity, but we cannot do it directly because you are protected. So what we do is we try to make you kill each other and kill yourselves. And we do this by creating despair and rage. And what you are doing when you cross over so many dead souls is you are helping people raise their vibrations, so it is more difficult to make them fall into these dark negative states. So I told him that I was very sorry about what we had done to the Jinn, because I understood the Jinn were here long before humans were created, and that they considered this planet to be theirs. And then we came along and took it over. And we've polluted it terribly. mined minerals from the earth, which the Jinn need for their health. And he told me this was a problem, especially the gold. They need the gold for their health. And so their babies are being born sickly, and the Jinn are getting weak and have illnesses that they shouldn't be having because of the detrimental effect we've had on the planet and on the minerals and the elements. And that the Jinn have a grievance because in ancient times, the humans enslaved them by using incantations and spells. For example, Solomon enslaved the Jinn and work in his mines and build the Temple of Jerusalem. And this was humiliating to the Jinn people. You can imagine they wouldn't be happy being enslaved and forced to do the bidding of humans. So I said to him, I cannot speak for humanity. I can only speak for myself. And I want to say I'm very sorry for what we have done. And I want to give you a gift as a token of my good faith. So I asked Archangel Raphael, who is the healer archangel, to make a ball of the golden light of grace and give it to this spokesman of the Jinn. And I asked him to hold it in his hands, see if it felt safe to him. And if it did, he should press it into his heart. And he did so, and he began to weep. I said, why are you weeping? He said, because this is healing me. It's making me stronger. Could I have some more? So I told him, you ask Raphael yourself. Ask him to give you more golden light. He said, I can ask the angel. I thought he was your angel. No, he's not my angel. He belongs to everyone. All you have to do is ask. You have the right to ask the angel for healing. So he did, and Raphael gave him more golden light. And then I said, give the light to all of the other four. And they all had the same reaction. They all felt they were getting healed and getting stronger. So putting aside my doubts about my own sanity at that moment, I thought I better just keep on going with this. Not even sure how I knew what I was supposed to do. But what we did next was, I said, I want you to go now and tell everybody you know in the Jinn world that the Jinn have a right to help from the angels. And that they can all ask the angels to give them golden light and reconnect them with Source. So this was the problem. In ancient times, the Jinn had been put under a spell to forget that they had a right to a connection to the Creator. So this is where we left it, the five left. Let me see. Yes, the next day I asked him to come back because I wanted to see what had happened. Had he told anybody else? And he came back and he reported that the babies were recovering. They were no longer sickly. Everyone was getting healed. And I asked him then, are you an important person in the Jinn world? Are you like the king of the Jinn or something? And he said, no, I'm more like the prime minister. So I asked him, have you told the king? I don't know why I thought there was a king, but apparently I was right. He said, no, I can't tell the king. He would be very angry at me for talking to humans. We have a war against the humans, and it's forbidden to talk to humans. So I said to Barbara, you know what we have to do? We have to talk to the king of the Jinn. And she said to me something like, you want me to invite the king of the Jinn into my house and talk to him and channel him? And I said, yes, that's what we have to do. bless her heart, she agreed to it, and I asked Archangel Michael to bring us the king of the Jinn. And he did, brought him wrapped in light, and the king came in swirling like a tornado and fussing and fuming and threatening and spitting and so on. And we went through a similar process with him of giving him golden light, apologizing to him, and recognizing that he had reason to be furious with us and so forth, and giving him the golden light. And he felt the same after the golden light. And then he said it was such a revelation to him to realize he could be connected to God, to Source, that he decided on the spot to call off the war against the humans. And again, I had to put aside my doubts about my sanity at that moment. Have I really ended an ancient war between the Jinn and the humans? I said, I greatly appreciate that.
It is interesting, and certainly, you know, the structure that you pointed out in terms of there being kings is certainly echoed in other material, where the clans seem to be referenced by color, and there's a kingship within each of those clans. One thing I was really interested in, I suppose that's a spectacular story. I think when we spoke previously, you mentioned that they had an aversion to human beings' physical presence because of the iron in our blood. And I know that there's it's a common theme with Jinn having an aversion to iron. I know in the sites I visited in Delhi where they were casting out Jinn, part of that was exposure to iron with the patient. And that idea is quite common and across different cultures, certainly in Ireland, with fairies who seem to have a very similar lore about them as the Jinn. To protect newborn infants from the Jinn, pieces of iron, like iron scissors, were left near sleeping infants and that kind of thing to frighten away the fairies. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, this is an interesting subject, and it occurred to me at some point subsequent to the first visit that none of them had explained to me how it was that they were unable to kill us.
Right.
Directly. The Jinn live a long time, over 1,000 years. Individuals live maybe 2,000 years even. And they have lots of time to learn. And they become very wise and very clever. And so they know a great deal, which looks to us like magic. And so I asked one time, I think it was the king, first king that I met, why is it that you can't just kill us off? We were created, 150,000 years or so ago, and we've been around for millions of years. And you're very powerful and very wise. And he says it's because you're protected by angels and because you have iron in the blood. We carry iron in our hemoglobin. And I said, why does that protect us? He said that the major way that the Jinn have power is that they know how to channel and use the magnetic fluxes in the Earth's field. And that getting close to a human throws them off their game because the iron distorts the magnetic fields. So I thought I should start wearing an iron cross after that, but decided I didn't really need to because I'd befriended them.
And it's very, very interesting to see that kind of loop closed. Kind of having experienced it on some of my own travels and then looking into the lore, I really did wonder why the subject kept coming up. What was it about? iron. And
Well, that's what we were told. I don't know the whole story, but that's
yeah, sure, sure.
I know about it. I want to tell you that after meeting that king, we had a further very interesting encounter, because about a week later, my wife told me she had been seeing red fiery shapes flashing about the house during the night, partly in dreams and partly in a semi-sleeping state. So in the morning, we called the king to us again and asked him if he knew what these red shapes were all about. And he told us that he was the king, not of all the Jinn, but of the Green clan.
Mm-hmm.
And that the Red clan was very angry with him for having made peace. And so there was a bit of a battle going on between the Reds and the Greens. Now, the king of the Red clan is known as Iblis. Or I think you English say Iblis.
Yes.
The other name for him is Shaitan.
Mm-hmm.
Is a way of saying Satan. It's an interesting idea that maybe Satan actually is a Jinn and not a devil. At any rate, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that term. So I again said to Barbara, you know what we have to do? We have to call in the king of the Red clan. And she said, as you might surmise, you want me to invite Iblis into my house and channel? And I said, yes, I do. It was a little frightening because as we sat to meditate that morning, we both heard a sound on the roof of the house, which sounded like a giant bird had landed on the roof and scraped it with his claws. So I had a picture of a pterodactyl in my mind. There wasn't any visible thing on the roof, but it was one of the Reds. So we invited Iblis, and he came in the same fashion as the king of the Greens, fussing and fuming and so forth. But we didn't have a chance to talk to him because Michael pulled him aside before we got there and started talking to him. And Barbara saw this. Michael put his hand on Iblis's shoulder and called him brother. I have work for you. And it turned out that Iblis actually was not a Jinn apparently, but it was an archangel also who had fallen from grace and was in a sense posing as a Jinn so he could run the Jinn, the Red clan, and cause mischief. And I hope he doesn't mind if I'm blowing his cover. But at any rate, what Michael told him was there was a need to create a place in the world of light for the deceased Jinn. And he wanted Iblis to build a palace in the world of light. Well, that was a big job, but something that Iblis recognized the need for. And so in this way, we made friends with another of the kings and produced something resembling peace between those two clans. And then after that, one by one, we sort of knocked off each king until we ran out of clans. And found that the clans often have feuds between them, sort of like humans do.
Right.
And we invoked an ascended master to help mediate those disputes. So that's an ongoing process, and there still are difficulties between the clans, but there's apparently been more cooperation as far as we've been able to discern it.
One thing I wanted to ask you about was the multi-generational aspect of Jinn intrusion in particular. When we spoke before, one of the things you related to was how long the Jinn lifespan is, and then when humans get involved in sorcery to ask the Jinn or petition the Jinn to do something on their behalf, to give them something, and of course the Jinn would want something in exchange for that, and how the negative outcomes of when that process falls apart.
This is a common way that humans can get in trouble with the Jinn.
Yeah.
I have to say, when I've had patients from the Middle East, they often are quite scornful of my claim to have some ability to work with the Jinn because they consider me a foolish American idea of how dangerous they are and so forth. They can have a reputation in the Middle East. But one of the main features we found in Jinn-human interactions is that an ancestor of the patient may have invoked what they consider demonic help to obtain wealth or the affections of another person or political gain or safety from a war or something like that. And what they're invoking are Jinn.
Mm-hmm.
And that the Jinn will do that, and then they want to be paid. And what they want to be paid is usually something the human doesn't want to pay, like your firstborn child.
Mm-hmm.
So when the human refuses to pay up, the Jinn says, "You have violated our contract, and now I own you, all your descendants." So I'm dealing with the descendants, and we have to trace it back. But this same Jinn is still alive, although the humans in the ancestry have died. But they live a long time. And then we find out there was a contract and so forth. And we do the basic reformation process, which involves, my goodness, I left out a very important step. Each of these Jinn have a demon attached to them, a fallen angel, and they don't know it. The fallen angel is fomenting their rage against us. The fallen angels get into humans and Jinn through their spiritual wounds. With the contract, we show the Jinn who's holding the contract or thinks he's holding the contract that he's got a dark entity which is influencing him, and they don't like to know that they've been influenced by somebody else. And once they see this dark thing, they say, "Oh my God, I had no idea this was going on." And then we separate them, and then I ask the Jinn, "How does it feel now to be separate?" And he says, "Well, it's quite different. I'm not so angry anymore." And then they get the golden light, and they usually are quite willing to say, "Well, I'm done with this stupid contract. It's part of it anyway." And I hand them over to the king or queen of the clan, and they go on their merry way, being Jinn and doing whatever Jinn do. So that's one common system. Another way the Jinn can be involved is they're invoked by a sorcerer in this lifetime to do some kind of mischief against somebody. And I ran into this with a woman from the Middle East who had come to the States to live, to escape basically from a very abusive father. She had refused to marry the man who was chosen for her by her father. And the parents of that young man were very angry at her about that. And from the other side, after they had died, they may have, I forget now whether they invoked a spell during life or after, probably during life, and then they passed on and they were still kind of nursing it. But what the spell involved was to entrap a Jinn and force him to do mischief to the target. The target in this case was a young woman who had bipolar disorder and was not doing well with that. And so her mother brought her to me because I might be able to do something spiritual to help them. And then she had second thoughts about it because I was doing things that didn't fit her belief system.
Right.
Talking to spirits, that's apparently forbidden in the Muslim faith. But then she just said, "Well, maybe we've got to try something." So we tried it. And I did manage to relieve this woman of her Jinn and convince these in-laws that they'd caused enough mischief and they could go to the afterlife now.
Right.
Subsequently, like a week later, the husband of the woman took her to Egypt to a sheikh to have the Jinn removed. He didn't know I'd already done it. And that was a kind of a brutal procedure.
Right.
But it was highly successful. She stopped hearing the voices after that, and her mood disorder became much more amenable to treatment.
I think what would be interesting for us maybe to wrap up on is to discuss waswas, particularly after talking about your patients hearing voices, your own experience in the gallery you mentioned in the 1960s, and that type of intrusion. And that, I mean, you described it really accurately. I mean, kind of to the point of where that kind of initial intrusion, that obsession level intrusion, where it's just on the outskirts of the individual, and the symptoms of was. I'd be interested to hear you kind of talk about what that means, but also kind of your concept of of the proliferation of it, like how vast an issue it is. I mean, you've touched on it earlier, where we're discussing about how this could be literally everyone in the Western world, and that we don't have the language or the rituals or spiritual practices to deal with it. How big of an issue do you think that is?
Well, about 100 years ago, the most popular church in the United States was the Spiritualist Church. So it was very common to go to church and have people get up in front and give messages from the dead.
Right.
And that fell out of favor in the 20s, I think it was. At the same time as the Flexner report came out, which was a critique of non-scientific medical practices and totally reformed the medical world to be based entirely on science.
Right.
So at about that time, it became heretical to believe that there are non-physical entities, invisible things that could have an influence on human life. And that's been the paradigm we've operated under for 100 years or so. So we blinded ourselves to a whole aspect of reality. The concept of waswas was unknown to me until I saw your video about it, and I thank you for that. It shows me that in the Islamic world, they have an understanding of this phenomenon as a spiritual phenomenon. In Western psychiatry, we talk about patients who hear voices that are mumbles or whispers. And this is very common, and it's usually diagnosed as a form of schizophrenia. Mm-hmm. I happen to think schizophrenia is a very misleading concept because it's not really an illness. It probably represents spirit attachments at varying degrees. This concept of the degree of penetration, it was made very clear in a book by Robert Bruce titled Practical Psychic Self-Defense. He refers to these things as negative entities, and he shortens it as negs.
Right.
He says it's the typical approach is that a negative entity will begin its attack on the person from the periphery, trying to get in. And they have to find a chink in your armor, some kind of a wounding, which creates a kind of a weak spot in your aura. They will enter into you during the dream states by influencing dreams. There may be things that are nagging at you, that are troublesome to you, and you dream about them. Mm-hmm. These entities will take those worries and expand them, magnify them, to make them into nightmares. And the more frightened they can make you, then the easier it is to get in, because the field gets weaker and smaller as you are in a more of a fearful state. Mm-hmm. So the patients often will report that their alleged schizophrenia begins with mumbled voices, and that over a period of time, the voices become more distinct and more clear, and then may be friendly or may be hostile, depending on the approach the particular spirit is taking. But the basic thrust of it is that the waswas phenomenon, or the whispers that you could barely make out, are kind of an early phenomenon in the attack of a spirit with detrimental intention. So knowing that, I'd rather see somebody who's hearing mumbled voices than someone who's hearing very clear ones.
Yeah.
It means that the difficulty hasn't penetrated that far into the person's field.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. It's my point of view. It's my view that looking at the symptom list that I've gleaned from research, that that it's absolutely endemic, that it's that nearly everybody is suffering to some degree or is under the very early stages of an attack. Certainly with the viewpoint that if we are a source of energy for even earthbound spirits, to give them some kind of energy source, or for, in a more kind of nourishment sense, for demonic entities who literally feed off our negative spiritual energy that we generate through states of despair, states of depression, that it seems to me that in a certain light, we're almost like we're being farmed to generate these responses.
It's very clear from my explorations that the demonic world certainly has a specific plan to keep humanity in a low vibrational state, of feeding energetically upon us, and that they're very threatened by the prospect that we will become enlightened and become immune to their attacks. So this explains explains many things about human life. One of the studies I recently embarked on is a study of vibrational dowsing, which is a way of trying to determine what kinds of energies are operating in a space or in a person. And it's clear from that and from other studies that electronic devices have a detrimental effect on the human energy field.
That's really interesting.
A little example is when I douse my own energetic state using a neutral pendulum, it rotates clockwise, indicating that my state is good. And when I touch my cell phone and douse, it rotates counterclockwise. So clearly there is a detrimental effect. And it's from, in a sense, the electromagnetic radiations, which cause a subtle vibration called negative green, by the French radiesthesists who studied this back in the 1930s. So here we are awash in this stuff with all the Wi-Fi around us and cell phone towers everywhere. In America, 60 cycle alternating current flowing throughout the whole house helps to keep our vibration at a low state. And operating televisions keeps everybody hypnotized because of the moving images, and keeps us all in a frightened state because we're addicted to those images for some reason. And what do you see on the news? You see only stories about, in the local news in the US anyway, stories about fires, auto wrecks, and shootings. In the national news, it's always about wars and political strife and latest outrages of the certain people in our government, and so forth. So everybody's really in a great state of uproar in the United States now, and that's by design. The dark entities are trying to do that to us. If we're angry and upset and afraid, then they can feed on us more easily. And the solution to that is not to get mad about it, but to fill oneself with joy and peace. And we do that through meditation and prayer and the help of benign spiritual entities who are also voices one can hear. Like who warned me about I was about to be mugged. That wasn't a jinn or a demon. That was a spirit guide with very benevolent intent. And those beings are there also ready to communicate with us if we only learn how to do it.
Right. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. It's been a fantastic, engaging, and truly interesting conversation, and I hope we'll do it again. Where you point out where people can find you if they want to find out more information about you?
My website is www.dralcorn.us, dralcorn.us.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. That's the location that I hope all my listeners go and have a look. And to find out more.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Let me wrap up here. Well, there you go. I hope that was interesting to you guys. A little bit more to add to the Jinn puzzle. A remarkable story, but the most interesting bit here for me is Dr. Alcorn's journey from psychiatrist to that of being a shamanic energy healer. And I think that's a journey that's becoming more prevalent as people become more exposed to the wider spectrum of life that just can't be explained from an empirical perspective. Big thanks again to Dr. Alcorn for coming on, and I'll see you guys soon. If you liked the video, please give us a thumbs up and a subscribe. Take care, talk soon.